Hey everybody, it's Joel Howe, and this is part 3 of our 3-part text animation tutorial. Today we're going to take our 3D text that we rendered out of 3ds Max and we're going to bring it into After Effects and basically finish it up with some particles and glows and some compositing. So this is going to be the final step in our process. So I would think that just like for your renders, still frame renders that come out of your 3D application, you would typically edit those with Photoshop, just like you would a photograph. Uh, in this case, I would use After Effects or a similar tool for any of your 3D animation. And so this is a standard process. And there's a lot of things that we do here that are probably going to be a little too expensive to do in 3D. So let's get started. Let's see. I'm going to restore this window. Okay, so I'm going to create this again from scratch, and so we'll get started straight away with that. If you take a look at the project window here, I've got my EXR sequence. I use the EXR files, and this is the render that came out of 3ds Max. And so we basically just sliced the text, and so we had that consistently placed slice plane, and the text appeared. And so that's basically what we've got to work with here. Strategy is going to be, number one, we're going to bring this in, and actually let's just bring this into a new composition right now. So I'm going to drag that down to the new comp window, and I can close this, and we'll give this a name. And so now we've got a composition that's basically the full length of the text here. We're going to want a little time at the beginning and end to get the particles going, to fade in other elements. So I'm going to set the composition to be a little bit longer than the actual runtime of the animation. So instead of 3 seconds and change, we'll just set it to 5 seconds. And that will allow us to kind of have some time before and after to play with the animation. Okay, so we've got our EXR sequence here. And I'm going to, let's go to the Effect Controls window. First thing I'll do is add under color correction, exposure. Because the EXR files are linear, so they don't have any gamma correction in them. And gamma correction for Windows is 2.2. So I'm going to basically just, it's actually 0.4 something, but I just set the gamma to 0.5, and that gets us pretty close to the render. 0.45 I think is the actual correction, but this gets us back to the original render as it was coming out of 3ds Max. And so we've got a nice kind of, notice in terms of 3D, I have the lights that are creating bright highlights on the fronts of the letters, and then the sides are lower in terms of tonal value, so it's easy to read that text. And so we've got our text here, and so my plan is there's this constant line, and I'll set this to just fit for now. There's a constant line right here, and we're going to create like a glowy plasma field kind of thing. Basically try to represent some energy where this logo is appearing from, and we'll fade that up right beforehand and fade it out right after. And that's going to really help us to kind of get people's attention, drive it to where the logo is going to be, and then show them the logo, and then have that disappear. So I'll make a new solid layer, and we'll make that just pure black. And so this is going to be a glowy kind of black and white layer effect. So I'll use, under noise and grain, the turbulent noise effect, and of course we get noise everywhere. Now it's really hard to see what we're doing, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually just draw a mask using the pen tool here. I've got that new layer selected, and I'm just drawing kind of a 6-point mask. And so now you can see that the mask, once I close that, now we can kind of see this. And I'm just going to drag this mask to approximate kind of what the glow area might be where these letters were coming from. And something like that. And I'll try and match the perspective there a little bit. And so that gives us some area to play with here. And if I just look at the mask, I can kind of drag that anywhere we want. But that gives me basic representation of the mask. Now we'll have to make a couple of quick adjustments here. And I'm going to boost the contrast up so we get brighter brights and darker darks. And I'm also going to go into the transform and reduce the scale so the noise gets smaller. And something like that. So now we have the text. It's going to be coming out of this area. And you can see that this might not be big enough because the O kind of comes out of nowhere. So maybe we'll take these and drag them over here, and take these and drag them over here. All right. And one thing that we want to do is have the noise actually animate. So I'm going to go right to the beginning, turn on keyframes for the evolution setting, and I'm going to go right to the end because this can animate even though we won't see it. And I'm just going to set it to 10 times. So it's going to actually animate and cycle through 10 times. So now if I scrub through, you should be able to see that noise is actually cycling through. Probably not fast enough for what we want. So I'll hit the U key so we can see those keyframes. And I'll set this to 25. And now we've got, that's moving a little bit faster. So that's a good place to start. So now if I go and bring up the mask, we'll change the feathering of this a little bit. And so we have a nice soft edge on it. And at that point, we're starting to see kind of that glowy effect. So the last step for this layer is I'm going to select that layer again and create a glow effect. So under Stylize Glow, we'll choose the color channels is fine. Notice that the lower the threshold goes, the more the brighter parts of the glow are there. And we can increase the radius. And so what we're seeing now is a nice effect. One last step is to change our blending mode. Instead of just normal, we only want to really add or brighten the screen. So you can use the add setting or you can use the screen blending mode. Either case, add is going to give you much brighter. I'm going to use screen for now and we can change that later. And I'm going to bring this down so that this is centered right on that line where the text is. We actually want to obscure that so it looks a little bit magical that this text is coming out of the area there. So maybe I want to boost the brightness a little bit here to kind of obscure that line even a little bit more, something like that. So now we're going to have this snapping and crackling, and now that logo is going to come out of nowhere. So that actually looks pretty good right now. You know, we've created this this effect, and we've got the so we're obscuring the fact that this was just a simple slice in 3D. And what I did in the previous example is I actually keyframed the points on the mask to start on the left and scale to the right, and then as the logo word appeared, once we cleared the bottom of the L and the O, this would actually shrink and stick just under the G. So it kind of looked like it was following it. But that is something you can do later. So now what we want to do is take, there's kind of a disconnect here. We've got this very bright particle, plasma field, whatever we want to call it, and then we've got this text which doesn't really kind of reflect any of the lighting there. So we just need to fake something to show that basically we've connected the two. So I'm going to do a little trick here. First of all, let's turn on time remapping for this layer, and we'll just drag that all the way over and drag that all the way over. So now we've got our logo taking up the full duration of the entire composition. And now I'll duplicate that layer, Control D, and I'm going to give this a new name. I'm going to call this the glowing logo layer. And what we'll do is we'll take that same glow effect, maybe boost it up, make it more intense, definitely increase the radius. So we've got this kind of overdone glow effect. Set the radius to 50. Intensity is there for 1. And so now we can see that there's a good correlation. There's a lot of glow effect that connects the logo with the plasma field. So the trick here is, if I zoom out, just zoom out a little bit, and I'll draw a mask for this layer, and I'll close that mask. Oops. And if I bring these down, you should be able to see the line that's created. There we go. So now we've got, here's the glowing layer, and here's the and above it is the layer that doesn't have the glow. So now if we take our glowing logo layer and we look at the mask, and I start to feather that, we can just feather that in the vertical direction. So I can unconnect that, and we can kind of feather that, and you can see that that glow is going to fade over that line created in the mask. So I'll do that for like an 80 pixel, and now we can go back and kind of play with the settings here, something like that, and I think that'll work. If we need to, we can always change the mask layer to something like this if we want to make it much more linear. I'm not worried about anything but this line that's crossing the logo. So if that fits, then great. Okay, so now we have the text. We have a plasma field. Oh, I should probably label that. So we'll call that plasma field layer. We have the glowing logo layer that is basically a duplicate with a glow effect and a mask to basically connect the plasma field to the actual logo footage. And the last piece that we need here is the particles. Those are going to be below, and I can go back to my project here and just drag down the same black solid layer that we had before, and I'll name this label the particles layer. Alright, and so we're going to put that below the logo because they're going to hopefully appear and kind of shoot out from under it as if they were somehow an effect of this plasma field. And so for the particles, I'm going to make sure I stay close to the start of the actual composition here, and we're going to use Trapcode Particular for this, which by default is a point source for particles. You can see that as we kind of stretch it out there, particles are expanding. If I keep things very close to the beginning of the composition, then the emitter, we can see that more clearly. And I'm going to set this from 100 to 1,000 particles per second. So that's basically the emitter right there. And if I change the emitter type from a point to a box, now I can start to change the size in X, and you can see that that's expanding out, and the Y is going to, we can make it narrow. The Z is there, so we've got our I'm not too worried about this. We can set the Y like that. We could set the Z like that, and now we can play with the rotation and how we want this to look, and kind of match it up. And then we'll just kind of move it into position. I'm just going to get it close down here and then play with the emitter size again just to match this up. And visually it just has to get close. And so now that's going to get kind of masked inside the plasma, and it's going to shoot particles out. So this is good. We're on only a minute here to set up, and we've already got kind of a good particle generation set up. One thing I would like to do is just make the particles a little bit bigger, so I'll double them in size and see how that looks. Okay, a few options here. You can change the size over the life of the particle. Some basic settings. And this is particular, and there's some great stuff in here. Different options. We'll have to cover those in a little different tutorial. But we have a whole lot of options for the size of the particle over time, the color of the particle over time, that kind of thing. I need to go to physics and actually turn on gravity. So I'm going to set gravity to 100, see what that looks like. Now we've got gravity pulling that down, which is excellent. And let's see. I think I want to change the direction to outwards so we get more of a shooting out from the surface effect. Okay. So now we've got a situation where we've got the particles, they're being generated. They have a softness to them, so there's almost like a glow on them already. And they're helping to sell the idea of the plasma field, and they just add visual interest here as well. So and that helps to drive the appearance of the logo. So we're actually in really good shape. I'm just going to play this back in real time, see what it looks like. So the particles to me aren't falling fast enough. I'd like to see a little more gravity. And then I think we're in good shape. The particles are a little big and blobby too. Bigger than the noise here. So let's double the gravity. Always try to double or even multiply by 10. And maybe we change some of the velocity, maybe boost the velocity so they shoot out a little bit more. And you can see that effect there. And alright, so that's better. Things are falling faster, and the size was a little bit too much, so maybe we'll go back down to 5 or 6. And actually, and there's other different kinds of particles as well. I think I used the star in the previous example, and we can play with different yeah, so we can keep it as that for now, just to kind of match it up. Okay, so at this point we've got all the pieces we need. There's a little bit more animation that we need to do, and so let's do that really quick. This is for the actual text. Here's where our logo first appears, is basically between these two keyframes. This is our time remapping keyframes. So the plasma field should be ready at this point to be able to cover for the logo appearing. So if I go to the plasma field and I add the opacity layer, T for transparency or opacity, and we'll toggle that for animation, and then I'll just go back, go back like 10 frames and set that to 0, and then we'll go over to when the logo's done, add a keyframe there, and go out 10 frames, and we'll set that to 0. And then we can do the same thing for the particles. Now, particles opacity isn't going to work. We want to actually control particle generation based on when that plasma field is there. So when the plasma field is fully visible, we're going to be generating 1,000 particles per second. And then earlier, when the plasma field is just starting to form, that's when we'll have it be set to 0. And so now if I hit U, you can see those keyframes. So now the plasma field forms, we get some particles, and then we have to do the same thing when we get to the end. So we've got the plasma field still fully visible, fully opaque. We've got we'll set a keyframe there, and then cut the particles as the plasma field disappears. So at this point, so we get a nice fade out of particles. and there's some stragglers there, but so maybe you could even need more time. You basically add more time at the end to give the animation enough time for those particles to fall off the screen, or you could go back and increase your gravity in the physics. So maybe if I set that to 300, we'd be a little further along, and then maybe we only do like 5 keyframes, and it's a very quick start to the particles and a very quick finish. Okay, now the last piece here is we've got this glowing text logo, which correlates really well with the plasma field. But as the plasma field is faded out, we also want to kind of build a connection between the two, even though they're not related. We'll take that glowing logo, which has no opacity animation, and I'll hit T, and as the particles start to dissipate, we'll go from a full opacity of 100, and as the particles fade away, we can set that to 0, and that will allow us to kind of have that glow fade out with the particles, and that might actually stick around a little bit later. I don't know if some of you might be type A and you like to see all your keyframes in a row, but generally speaking, you want to have some offsets of keyframes so that even though the plasma field here is starting to fade out, the glowing logo piece fades out later. So it feels a little more organic that way. And that's it. So we've taken the glowing part of the G, and that's basically disappeared at this point. So I think we're good. I think at this point I'll maximize the frame, and we'll try that again. We'll maximize the frame, and we'll see if we can't generate all these particles in a quick RAM preview. And again, we've got that plasma field, we've got the noise creating the turbulent noise effect, adding kind of crackles and pops here. We're using the screen mode so that it's only brightening the area. There is a little edge there of the L that we may want to hide later. At the same time, Particular is generating particles based on that and pulling them down with gravity. And again, you could animate the mask that defines this plasma field and have it start with the L and with the top of the L, and then widen out for the whole logo, and then shrink down with the G. But in general, this looks pretty good, and we did this pretty quickly. So if you liked what you saw today, great. Give us the thumbs up, and or subscribe, as we'll be doing more videos on 3D and animation going forward. Thanks for watching.